So hi there. I'm John Ciovacco. I am, I guess, kind of the chair of this now. The co-chair didn't make it, so don't tell him. I'm just the chair of this session. It says co-chair. We need to fix that. At any rate, we've got a big day today. Probably just a little over 500 folks signed up, so that's pretty good. And I have to say, I really appreciate people coming out. I know that this is a big effort. It's a very time of a lot of uncertainty for us, and especially those, I'm really grateful for people that came maybe from another country, risk your life to come into our country to attend our event, which I have to say, it's a tough time out there right now, but the fact that so many of you are here, and I just want to tell you, you're very welcome to be here. I said I wouldn't cry. Let's talk about my tie. So, does anybody know what this is? It's the climate temperatures from 1850, which is kind of cool up by my neck, which is nice. And then it gets a little warm as it gets a little lower. So yeah, this is from 1850 to 2022. And I have socks to match. Yep. So we have those. Yep. It's kind of the opposite. It's cool by my toes and a little hotter as it goes up, so. See, that got me out of the weepy thing, so I'm good now. Registration. So everybody got your badges and stuff. If you're super famous like me, you have a lot of these little flags. If you haven't collected your flags, get them, because it's not a contest, but if it was, I want to win it. I want to thank the conference staff, and I have to say there wasn't that many staff. We pull it together with just a few of us, but Christine Hoffer, our executive director, wow, you're more famous than me. I don't know if I like that. Desiree and Kathy are always out by registration. You're probably familiar with them. They're Aztech folks. Chris Winkler, Eowyn Kendall, John Rath, and Matt Arison are the proctors, but also have been helping pull all this together. So they're stationed in each room. And maybe if they could identify themselves. So Chris, Eowyn, John Rath, and Matt. So they're going to be in the rooms trying to keep the sessions together. So if you have questions, problems, or sarcasms, see them. I'm going to pop through. We have a Wi-Fi network for the conference, and so that's the network name, and that's the password. Maybe take a picture of it if you would like. Or ask a friend who has a camera handy. And then Rachel's not ready for this, but. So Rachel Collet's been our photographer for years. But if you jump on that QR code, what we're trying to do this year is we're trying to get some photos taken. She's got a friend here, Annie, who's processing those photos, and we're trying to get them posted to that link. So if you put your camera on that, hit it. If you're too old to know how to do that, ask a young person to help you. It's a QR code, they call it. I don't know what it stands for because I'm old. But there you go, Rachel. You might have that. Do you have the same clothes on? I was going to tell you I was going to do that, but I knew you would disapprove. It's too fun. Probably most of you won't have photos that you don't expect come up. We've got basically 3 tracks after we get through the opening session today. So the opening session, we're gonna hear from Christine Hoffer, and we're gonna hear from Jamie Van Nostrand from the Massachusetts DPU, which is terrific. I don't know if I say James, Jamie. It's very confusing for us, honestly. Whatever. We're gonna go with whatever. We're gonna call you Jamie. We're gonna be friendly. And we'll also hear from Tishan Burris from Climate Control in just a bit. Our climate master. Again, a little confusing for the rest of us, but we'll get through that. Just a few notes on the tracks. The center track there, which is the design track, that's for CEU credits, which is really PDH credits, so it's geared towards engineers. So if you are an engineer and you ride through that track, you need to sign up as that, and you need to make sure that you sign in and all that good stuff. But that's the only track, and there's 5 sessions in there today. The building electrification and thermal energy network tracks are great too. They're not CEU credits. And then tomorrow we have another group of 4 sessions in 3 tracks. There's a building electrification, there's policy and programs, and there's geothermal exchange. So there's a little bit of a different set of tracks. I'm not going to go into detail on that. All of the sessions are recorded, and all of the slides will be available for download. So we are sticklers about having everything set into a microphone, because that's the recording element of this, is that we make sure that everything gets recorded, including your questions. So if you ask a question, wait for a microphone, or the presenter should repeat that question so the people at home know what's going on. I hate when there's plastic bottles or paper cups up on these tables. So if you're a presenter, just don't bring that up, because it's going to upset me. Hide that, Jamie. Yeah, hide that. We won't be friends if that happens. Let me see. I think we're pretty good on that. Let me see what comes up next. So I would like to maybe have Jens just say a couple of words. Come on, Jens. Jens Panikow is the president of NY-GEO.
Don't always warn me that I know how to make an entrance, so. Anyway, thank you all for coming. This is amazing. This is the 3rd meeting in a row where we are over 500 people. And we decided to go down to New York City to introduce GEO to the New York City market, because there are many, many projects going on there last fall. And so this is coming back home. We started about 12 years ago with 24 people at Skidmore College, 24 in 2 little rooms. And like I said, this is the largest geothermal get-together, usually every year, in pretty much the entire world. I'm not aware of any other meeting doing this. So my gratitude to John. He is the program guy, and he does a wonderful job, as you will see and as you already know. So very highly appreciated. This will be a lot about thermal energy networks. This will be a lot about grid avoidance. We really, really started to understand the value of geothermal, and so do the utilities, and so do the regulators, and so do the politicians, and everybody else. So we are looking forward to introduce all that data to you, and this is where we see the value of GEO. Thanks again for coming. I hope we will all wake up by learning a lot in the next few days, and we will go here with a changed mind, because that's necessary right now, not only for our industry, but for the entire energy sector. I'd appreciate all you coming. Back to John. And I will really crawl down here somehow.
Oh, let's get Titian up here.
Thank you, John. Those are some big socks to fill, and they weren't giving out terracotta cups, so sorry. Anyways, thanks for allowing me to speak. So I got a couple things I just kind of want to talk about. It is confusing, Climate Control Group, Climate Master. So we're a division of the Climate Control Group, but we're Climate Master, and so what we do is we manufacture ground source heat pumps. So in 1957, we started that business. So we've been around for a while. Primarily started out water loop systems. Some of the people that started that business are the pioneers of the water loop heat pump system, which many of you are familiar with, cooling tower boiler. And then that just synthesized into ground source heat pump manufacturing, et cetera. So that was 40 years later. I showed up in 1997. Again, my name's Titian Burris. I'm the National Sales Manager for Climate Master. You know, looking around in this room and seeing how many people are here is absolutely amazing. In 1997, I was welcomed and embraced to this industry as a 22-year-old, ambitious, eager young man. I've been on a drilling rig. I've installed plenty of systems myself. I've been in attics. I've been in crawl spaces, and it's tough work. With that said, there are many people that some of which are in this room, some have also passed on, that are truly pioneers in this business. And I wanted to name a couple of those names. Dan Ellis, some of you might know who that is. I call him the king of the geothermal heat pump industry because he basically really got it to where it's at today. John Bailey, another guy, Van Boren, Jeff Hammond. Jeff, you're a part of this. So to those people, Dr. Bose, Bill Van Alstyne, incredible mechanical contractor, Bill was, Ray Bailiff, Michael Albertson, the Albertson family, just been instrumental in etching where we're at today, etching it into the stone of this industry. Now, these people, because of what they did and the commitment they made to our industry, that is why we're here today. Those that work in this industry, that have jobs that make money off of this industry, such as myself, that get a paycheck, we would not be here today if it wasn't for those people. So I want to say thank you. A couple other things, talking about the mechanical, yes, thank you. Now, those are some of the pioneers I mentioned, but what's even more important than that are the distributors, the HVAC mechanical contractors, the drillers, the loopers, the architects, the specifying engineers, the builders, the owners. If it wasn't for those people, we wouldn't be here today. We would not. None of us. Not a one of us. So when I was 22 years old, I was basically raised as a geo junkie, and that's what I am. I love this industry more than anybody can imagine. The other thing I wanted to mention is the utilities. Not only the IOUs, but the rural electric cooperatives. That is the foundation of how this industry started. So if you're in here today, thank you. We would not be here today if it was not for you. I think a lot of times, you know, these keynote speakers, these I'm not giving a commercial. What I want to tell you is thank you, because I love my job and I love the career that I've had, almost 30 years in this business. The labor laws weren't really good back then when I was 10, so anyways. With that said, I won't continue on, but I think you get my point. As a Gold Conference sponsor, please enjoy this conference. There are many smart people in this building. I've been around a lot of these smart people, and what they want to do is they want to continue on, carry on their legacy. They want to teach all the new people that are in this room. They want to teach you about this technology. So please, learn as much as you can, as I will. I'm always learning. So regardless of the heat pump manufacturer that you specify, that you buy from or install, we would not be here without you. I would not be here without you. So on behalf of the Climate Control Group and my business division, Climate Master, sincerely, thank you very much for coming.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Tishan. And then we'll have Water Furnace up tomorrow morning to talk as the other gold sponsor for us. Now it's you, right? This is Christine Hoffer, Executive Director, kind of a friend. I mean, we have sort of this, thing going on, but. So I do the program, so all the educational sessions and stuff, that's pretty much me and a couple other people. A1 helps some. And then she does everything else. And there's a lot of everything else. So the fact that, anything is organized even remotely at all is this woman. So I'd like to bring up Christine Hoffer, our Executive Director.
So the rolling slides are all of our sponsors. And as Tishan said, we can't do this without all of you. we really can't do this without our sponsors and our exhibitors. Putting on an event like this is incredibly expensive. In registration might say, oh my God, really? And it really, really is. So sponsors, thank you. If you could stand just for a second and let us all know who you are, that would be really terrific. So go ahead and stand, sponsors.
Oh, they're shy.
There's a whole table right there. All sponsors. I'm going to do this for John. So all of you folks that are standing in the back of the room, please move forward and sit down. That would be great. Yesterday, we did a drilling demonstration for the first time, followed by some site tours. The drilling demonstration, who was able to do that yesterday? Was it good? So special thanks to Terrasonic for hauling their rig up and drilling for us yesterday. The students at BOCES had a great experience. Local driller Rosick drilled the day prior, also exposed that to the kids at BOCES. I chose that location because ultimately our goal is to try and get drilling and the ICHPA accredited installer training and the iterations of that into our trade school here in New York State, and that was the first step in order for us to do that. So I'm very appreciative of everybody that participated in that, and to the presenting sponsor of that, NY-GEO. Eric and his group are new to all of us. We're looking forward to working with them and expanding the mission of geothermal and ground source heat pumps. So thank you, Eric. Exhibitors, we have just over about 60 exhibitors which are out there. Again, they're here to share with you their products and services so that we as an industry can advance what we do, which is great. And again, it's ground source heat pumps. And again, we can't do this without them. So thank you so much for being here. Last, in Brooklyn, I talked a little bit about geothermal education. And so this slide here is 2024, which I showed in Brooklyn, and 2025 year to date. Those numbers aren't growing the way that we want them to. So NY-GEO, we submitted for the PATH grant, which has been delayed due to the new administration. We hope that moves forward, and if we get that, we're hoping to do work with the folks of you in the room to do some training and advance the people that are on this. New York State, the clean heat contractors, how do I go back? Clean heat contractors, there's about 1,000 of them in New York State. Less than 100 are certified to do geothermal. In New York State, to get the clean heat rebates, you have to have somebody on your staff that's an accredited installer. We only have 97, we need to fix that. So collectively, how do we do that? How do we fix that problem and train more people? So I would like to have a committee to work with me and our friends at ICHPA to try and advance and get more people trained. Going back to the people that are here in this room today, we have over 225 organizations that are represented here today of the 500 plus people that are here. That speaks volumes, but there's a lot more that need to be in our room, in ICHPA's room, and in the other state association rooms when they're talking about what we're doing, so that collectively we can work together to advance ground source heat pumps and geothermal. I'm going to digress from this for just a minute and talk about at ICHPA. The heat pump manufacturers, the ground source heat pump manufacturers had a little panel. It was great. I loved it. And I think it was I'm not sure which one it was, but they talked about that we are competitors, but we're also in the business to do what we do, and that's decarbonize and electrify the world. I was really moved by that because it is how our industry is going to move forward, and that is working collaboratively and collectively to do our mission, and that is to advance geothermal. And my children, I talked about lacrosse last time, I talked about FIRST Robotics this time. There's a program called FIRST Robotics. If you're not involved in that as an engineering firm, as a manufacturer, you really need to check it out. But they have a thing called gracious competitiveness. So every kid gets 6 weeks to conceptualize, build a competitive robot. They go into competition, and you're paired randomly with 2 other teams to either be on offense or defense. And then you switch. So I'm Christine Hoffer, my robot needs a rubber band. I don't have a rubber band. They make an announcement. Christine Hoffer at booth 12 needs a rubber band. 40 teams will come and bring me a rubber band because they want my robot to be successful. They want my robot to be competitive. They want my robot and my team to have success. And that's what I heard from that manufacturers panel at ICHPA. It was amazing. So thank you so much for doing that, and thank you for doing what you do for all of us. Drillers, the same thing. We can't do what we do without you. Thank you for being here. There's a lot of drillers here, and I think it's fantastic. So thank you very, very much. So advancing ground source heat pumps. So you all just received an email. It dropped about 8:45. So part of what we do at NY-GEO is we work hard to ensure that legislation and policies provide opportunities for geothermal and ground source heat pumps. Bill Nowak, I apologize, I left my notes in my room, gave me a great thing to say about everything, but we have a couple of really important things, the New York Heat Act and Cap and Invest, and an increase in geothermal tax credit. The QR code, look at it, fill it out. Your voice is what's going to help us have success. There's a QR code. John helped me with that. Your voice is what matters. I could go and talk about it all day long. I'm Christine Hoffer, I'm the executive director, but I am not John Ciovacco, the guy that's out there digging in the dirt, putting in that heat pump. I'm not the one that's helping that building physically to make stuff happen. Our administrators from the federal level and the state level want to hear from you. So when we reach out and ask you to sign your name onto something, please do it. Because if we have this many voices versus one voice, we're going to have success. They're going to listen to us. So this, again, this QR code was dropped to your email. So take the time. Our friends from Renewable Heat Now are here just adjacent to the registration table. They'd be happy to answer any of your questions and take your signatures. This is just some of the stuff we do. I wouldn't talk about membership, but I'm running out of time, and John hasn't yelled at me yet. But the drilling legislation is another thing that we did. Tight on time. Workforce development, we talked about that. Membership. Membership is so important, and membership allows for us to do what we do. So we have about 287 members that represent about 800 people. Those of you that are in the room that are not a NY-GEO member, those of you that are in the room that are not an ICHPA member, you need to become a member. Again, we go and we talk to our legislators, we need to say, I have 1,000 members versus 227 or 287 members. That just speaks volumes when we're talking to people, because your voice matters and those numbers matter. So take the time, spend a couple extra dollars, and please join us. And if you do, I got some new swag for you. We have these great new lapel pins. We have vehicle stickers and stickers for your computer. So we can brand you up. So at the end of last year in Brooklyn, we're stronger together. Join NY-GEO, join a working group, support NY-GEO. Let's go, GEO. Thank you.
All right, so some of you might know that I'm not that big on these formal introductions. You know, you read this stuff, it's all about how great Jamie is. He's Jamie now. See, we went casual. It's like a magic trick. And so, but what I will say is that we asked Rory Christian to be here, and he had a conflict. He's got a big set of meetings in the next couple of days, and he couldn't make it the chair of the Public Service Commission in New York. And so then I said, well, do you think it's okay if I ask Jamie from Massachusetts? And he said, I think he would be excellent. So, and I had served on a panel recently in Massachusetts that we were on in Boston area, and then also saw you speak. And one of the things that's neat about what's happened in Massachusetts is, especially with the thermal energy networks and the utilities kind of trying that out, they're a chapter or two ahead of New York in some ways in that regard. And this is a process that, that Jamie's been a part of and trying to think through. And it's bedeviling. You know, it's not, don't expect him to come up here and have all the answers, but he's in the game with the rest of us. He's trying to figure out the biggest of big solutions, and they have some ideas about how they want to do that, and some initiatives they're taking, just like we do in New York, and there's a nice collaboration between the two. So I think it's an excellent opportunity for us to hear from someone from a neighboring state that is basically has a lot of the same kind of struggles that we have, trying to figure out what this transition looks like. And with that, I would like to bring up Jamie Van Nostrand and the chair of the DPU, not PSU.
just doing that. Yeah, just down is good.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks, Christine. I feel like I was able to navigate the stairway, so I'm halfway there. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here, even though I was the second choice behind Rory Christian. I tell you, Rory is a great guy. He's been a very good friend. I've been chair of the Massachusetts Commission for a couple of years, and Rory's been a good friend, a mentor. He's just a wonderful guy. And you're going to see Radina Volova later on today. There's a couple of really good commissioners in New York that I think are really engaged on these clean energy issues, and so it's a real treat, I think, when you see Radina this evening. So let's a little bit of overview. I think, as John said, Massachusetts and New York are I think in similar places, and New York's a little bit ahead in some areas, and we maybe are in another, but I think we're probably a couple of the leading states in terms of where we are on these things. We're dealing with a lot of the same issues. That's one of the reasons I've gotten to know Rory fairly well, is we have common issues, this natural gas transition, what we're doing to basically achieve our net zero, our carbon objectives for the state, and that phase out of the natural gas industry, and that's where geothermal comes into play. So Rory and I have been on some committees together and some task forces together. We try to, I think the regulators across the country, we tend to work together on a lot of these things. I'm not shy about stealing good ideas. I've talked to Rory about legislation in New York. There's some good commissioners in California, Colorado. We all compare notes on these things because we're all struggling with these same issues, and it's really complicated. So we try to get all the help we can by talking to each other. So I'm just going to give an overview of what's going on in Massachusetts, sort of the regulatory framework in terms of the clean energy objectives we're trying to achieve, what the statutory framework is for network geothermal, what we're doing at the DPU in terms of the regulatory framework, and then some of the current challenges. But before I get into that boring stuff about Massachusetts, I want to just provide an overview in terms of the big picture, sort of why I'm here and why I think there's so many of you here, and what I think of as a policymaker when I think about the prospects for geothermal, and I think they're very bright. That's a big sun at the end of that railroad track there. Anyway, so what are the drivers that make the future so bright for geothermal? One of the things you all know, decarbonization initiatives. We've got a lot of states around the country, like New York and Massachusetts, that have very aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals. And how do you get there? Well, part of that is the transition away from natural gas. And in Massachusetts, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but we issued an order. The primary pathway for that is electrification, both ground source heat pump and air source heat pump. So that's a big driver. That's a big tailwind, I think, in terms of what you're all trying to accomplish. The LDC transition, we're looking about what's going to happen with these local gas distribution companies. Where does their workforce go? What's the future look like? You know, Massachusetts, we have 5 LDCs, local gas distribution companies, 3 large electric distribution companies. 3 of them are combination utilities, dual fuel, but we've got a couple of them that are just gas-only utilities, and you got to think about that transition. Well, network geothermal is a pretty good pathway for a transition. I'm going to talk about some of the statutes that we have and some of the regulatory things in Massachusetts, but to try to encourage the LDCs to morph into a thermal network company. Workforce transition is another big thing. You probably heard about the project. I'll talk a little bit about it, but Eversource has a very successful, the first utility-scale network geothermal project in the country in Framingham. I've spent a little time out there. Was up there for the ribbon-cutting ceremony in June of last year when it went into operation. But if you look at what that project, when you walk around, it's what are they doing? They're laying pipes down the middle of the street and they're running laterals out to houses, and that's a lot what an LDC does right now. And so when you look about the workforce transition issues, because I think we have that issue coming up when we try to accomplish these things at a policy level. You've got to think about, well, what are we doing with the employees that are in that transition? So there's big advantages to network geothermal. When we issued our order in the future gas docket I'm going to talk about, that's one of the attractions we said that we need to really be thinking about. We don't have direct jurisdiction over those labor and workforce type issues, but it's something that regulators think about as a matter of policy. This is a little bit better for the transition for the LDC workers. The grid benefits, that just comes from the efficiency of ground source heat pumps. There's a really great study that came out, Oak Ridge National Laboratories, I think probably November of 2023, November, December. But when you think about how much more efficient ground source heat pumps are than electric air source heat pumps, that just means there are fewer electrons going through the New York ISO grid and in New England's ISO New England, and so that market clearing price is lower because there's just fewer electrons. Supply and demand, it's basically just supply and demand. Everybody benefits from that lower market clearing price because the ground source heat pumps are so much more efficient than air source heat pumps. Now, part of our challenge as a regulator is trying to quantify that and make sure when we're designing programs to encourage ground source heat pumps, how do we quantify that and make sure that those who invest in these systems are actually compensated for the benefits that they provide. And finally, reduced T&D infrastructure is a kind of a corollary of that. But in Massachusetts, when I'm not working on the natural gas transition, we also have a clean energy transition for the EDCs, the electric distribution companies. They filed electric sector modernization plans last year. We approved them as a strategic plan level in August. But it's pretty much how much are we going to be spending, the three large electric distribution companies, Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, how much are we going to be spending the next 5 to 10 years on T&D infrastructure to accommodate decarbonization of buildings, because the air source, ground source heat pumps, and then decarbonization of the transportation network. So the more we can reduce those peaks, and the peaks are so much lower with ground source heat pumps than they are with air source heat pumps, the more we can reduce those peaks, the less the infrastructure needs to be built. And as a regulator, if I'm not working on the natural gas transition or the electric and clean energy build out, I'm thinking about affordability. And when we look at these electric sector modernization plans, it's billions of dollars of new substations, upgraded substations. That all ends up on the ratepayer's bill. And if we can do things, encourage more ground source heat pumps, keep those peaks lower, then that's less stuff, that's less T&D infrastructure utilities have to build, and that's fewer dollars that end up on your bill. So before we get into some of the details of what we're doing in Massachusetts, I just want to provide this big picture overview of why I think the future is really bright for this industry. These are a lot of benefits that flow from this technology. My job as a regulator, and Rory's job, and when you see Rodina later tonight, her job, our job is to make sure that those benefits are quantified, and when we design programs and incentives, that's all captured, because that's what we do as regulators is make sure that those who invest in these technologies are compensated for the value that they provide to the grid. So what we're doing in Massachusetts, I don't think New York is all that much different, but way back in 2008, we're talking 17 years ago, we did the Global Warming Solutions Act. That's where we pretty much said net zero by 2050. Lots of states did that, but what then happened in June of 2022, there was another climate bill that was passed that said we want to have sector-specific emissions targets. So for 2025 and 2030, so we take that overall net zero by 2050, and let's crank that back and figure out, well, what do we need to accomplish for the residential and commercial buildings, and actually bring this down, and which makes it more clear to me what it is that we have to do as an agency. So you can't really see this, but you can just see the trends in terms of where those numbers are coming down. So that's 2030 on the far right-hand side. You can see transportation. What we have jurisdiction over are the buildings. And so that's the reduction that we're looking for in buildings. So when we're looking at our future of gas docket, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get the LDCs on a pathway so they can achieve those reductions, because now we have sector limits and sublimits that as an agency, my job, in my mind, the legislature, by passing the Global Warming Solutions Act and by passing the 2022 Climate Act, and we did this Clean Energy Climate Plan that says these are the sector limits and sublimits, those are now the statutory targets. These are not just objectives, they're not goals, they're targets. And my job is to try to get the LDCs on a pathway to achieve that. So down the lower part of the case is sort of where we need to be 2025 and 2030 in terms of those greenhouse gas emissions from the residential and commercial sectors. So that's the statutory framework within which we're trying to accomplish this clean energy transition. Now, I've got a lot of other things that have been done the last few years in Massachusetts with respect to geothermal in particular. So the 2021 climate bill basically allow these pilot projects for development of utility-scale renewable thermal energy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the demonstration projects that we have underway in Massachusetts, but we have specific legislation that encourage the LDCs go to the DPU and propose these utility-scale renewable thermal energy projects. Another thing we're struggling with right now, we're going to be issuing an order next on the 30th, so that's a week from today. So we have this program in Massachusetts called the Gas System Enhancement Plans, and most states around the country have something like it, but it's basically accelerated rate recovery to address leak-prone pipe. So in Massachusetts, because we've had the pipe in the ground for a long time, I was just in Chicago last week for a Climate Imperative Foundation, had all the organizations around the country that get money from the Climate Imperative Foundation to address this natural gas transition. And Doug Scott, who's the chair of the Illinois Commission, made the remark that in Illinois they have an issue of leak-prone pipe. This pipe's been in the ground so long that Abraham Lincoln put it into the ground. I said, in Massachusetts it was Paul Revere, so we got you beat. We just had the 250th anniversary of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere just last Thursday night. But lots of leak-prone pipe. But around the country there's a recognition that it's leaky, it needs to be addressed to comply with the PHMSA requirements at the federal level. So lots of states passed these statutes, and Massachusetts was called the Gas Leaks Act. It basically says utilities come in, the LDCs come in on October 31st. They say, here's how much money we're going to spend in the year beginning May 1. And this year in Massachusetts, $902 million, the 5 LDCs collectively. And so we had 6 months of proceedings. Right now, we're allowing them to recover up to 3% of their revenue. That's how they got the $900 million number. It's basically up to 3% of their revenue can be spent through these projects. And then once we issue an order on April 30th, May 1, they start to recover those costs and rates. So it's very expedited rate recovery. We addressed in this proceeding the absence of a cost containment mechanism, because most utility expenses under traditional rate making, there's what's called a regulatory lag. You spend the money 1 year and you might have to wait a few years before you get recovery and rate. That creates some incentive to control costs. And so what we put on the table in this GSEP docket is we want to look at this because it seems like we're not getting a whole lot of leak-prone pipe repaired as quickly as we wanted. What's happening is the cost per mile is going way up because there's not a cost containment incentive. So we're looking at that. So that's a long way of getting me to this point here, but the 2022 climate bill with respect to network geothermal said, oh, by the way, instead of just replacing that pipe, that leak-prone pipe, you can actually include GSEP, you can include it in your GSEP program, utility scale non-emitting renewable thermal energy infrastructure, which is a nice way of saying a thermal energy network. So basically, and that's one of the things we looked at in these GSEP dockets as well, is are you considering repair or relining versus just replacing? So we're just taking a much deeper dive into this, so that order is going to come out in about a week. But what we did in our Future of Gas docket was really encourage the LDCs to, if we're going to achieve these greenhouse gas targets, the answer is not putting more natural gas pipe in the ground, which lasts for 50 or 60 years. We need to find a different path, and so this legislation authorizes us to take some of that GSEP money and say, let's do a thermal energy network instead, and help our pathway off natural gas. And there's another thing in terms of this, what's the role of the gas companies? So the 2024 climate bill, which was passed last November, basically allows the gas company to basically get in the business of providing network geothermal. And I think Christine's slide mentioned the obligation to serve. That's an issue that's come up in New York. It comes up in Massachusetts. If you're trying to get new service, is the availability of other substitutes, can we take that into account? Because one of the things, and I'll talk about it later on, but the obligation to serve is a big issue in terms of being able, it's really the continuing obligation to continue providing service to existing customers. Because when we do these demonstration projects, the ability to substitute thermal or electric for natural gas is very much in question. We can't go and say, we're going to substitute electric or ground source heat pumps, air source and ground source heat pumps for your natural gas. That's not something that we currently think we have the authority to do. So it was addressed in the legislation. And another piece was part of what we're talking about in the GSEP orders coming out next week is moving away from replacing to remediate leak-prone pipe rather than just replace it. So, and also retirement in favor of a thermal energy network. So our future of gas proceeding, as I mentioned, when I got to the commission in May of 2023, I inherited this docket. The number of it, 2080, pretty much lets you know it was started in 2020. And so I said, I think I probably need to get an order out on this thing. So December of 6, 2023, we issued a docket that enunciated regulatory principles, or more or less a regulatory framework for how we're going to manage this natural gas transition. And what we said, as I mentioned, electrification is the primary pathway, whether it's air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps, which includes geothermal energy networks. One of the big things we did in that order was require the consideration of non-gas pipeline alternatives. Basically said, we want to discourage any additional investment in the local gas distribution infrastructure, and utilities have the burden to show that you consider non-gas pipeline alternatives as a precondition before you can recover additional investment in basically additional investment in a natural gas system. So they took a while to develop that framework. They actually filed it with us a couple weeks ago. The other thing we did there was each of the LDCs has to file a climate compliance plan. Basically tell us how you're going to be on that pathway to achieve those greenhouse gas reduction targets that I identified in that earlier slide. So those were just filed on April 1, and as part of that, the utilities filed with us. This is our framework of analysis for our non-gas pipeline alternatives, the NPAs. So we're going to have proceedings on each of those for the 5 LDCs to take a close look at all those climate compliance plans, dig into those non-gas pipeline alternatives. Is this going to be sufficient? Is this a rigorous enough analysis? So we're working our way along in that process. I think it's what we saw in the GSEP docket. Technically, they were supposed to be considering non-gas pipeline alternatives there. We didn't see a whole lot of consideration, mostly because they said, well, there's a sense of urgency. If we need to really replace this or remediate this pipe, because of a sense of urgency, because of the safety issue, we might not have time to do that full analysis to allow consideration of a non-gas pipeline alternative. And the other thing is, in this future gas proceeding, we required each of the LDCs to file with us a targeted electrification project by March 1 of 2026. In other words, identify a portion. This is where what's called integrated energy planning comes into play, where the gas companies and electric companies need to get together. A gas company could identify a portion of its system based on the leak-prone pipe. This is a good area. We could probably just decommission this whole end of the line here in favor of electrification. But then the electric company has to step up and say, yes, we have the capacity to be able to take on that additional load. So we're requiring these demonstration projects. National Grid actually filed one in December, about 16 months earlier than required. We just had public hearings on a couple weeks ago in Leominster and Winthrop. 118 customers, I think, 14 different segments, but looking at, can we, instead of spending the money under GSEP to address the leak-prone pipe through replacement, can we instead put customers on, and this project is air source heat pumps, not ideal, but that's what National Grid came up with, so we'll be looking at that. But each of the other LDCs will have to come up with filings by next March 1 to do the same thing, electrification demonstration project. So the 2021 climate bill that authorized these demonstration projects gave us some direction in terms of what the DPU has to look at when we're considering these demonstration projects. That has to have a reasonable likelihood of facilitating substantial reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, no blending of other fuels with fossil-based natural gases, so no RNG, no hydrogen, and we need to use a third-party evaluation. And then obviously we need to consider the reasonableness of the size and the scope. Do the benefits justify the proposed cost to both participating customers and non-participating customers? So just the first look at the National Grid project in Leominster and Winthrop, it's a little on the expensive side, gotta say. And then what we look at as regulators as well, and I'll talk a little bit about the Framingham project that Eversource did as well, but Obviously, they're demonstration projects. We're going to learn from them. The costs are going to be a little high going at the outset, but can we bring those costs down? So you're looking for opportunities. Can we bring those costs down? National Grid, we need to look at the cost of basically going in and replacing for free all your gas appliances with electric appliances. Is that going to be sufficient incentive for customers to do that? What is the impact on the other customers, the non-participating customers? Does that make sense to socialize those costs and recover those costs from other customers? And that sort of goes back to some of the grid benefits that I talked about and the reduced T&D infrastructure. There are certain, but how does that help us achieve our greenhouse gas targets? And then the big thing for me, I've been kind of a climate change advocate for. I got my LLM from Pace Law School in 2010 in climate change. So a big thing of me is that social value of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions. What kind of price do you put on carbon when you're doing those calculations? That makes a big difference in terms of how much cost we can justify socializing the customers because of the extreme weather events that we're seeing across the country, but we've seen them in Massachusetts as well. And I think as a policymaker, we're not looking just at economic costs. We're looking at overall costs, which include the environmental impacts. That includes putting a price on carbon and putting that in there. Another thing we did in Massachusetts, let's cover this real quickly, but our Pipeline Safety Division issued some geothermal safety guidelines. Just very, very brief overview of the documents, but as we start thinking about regulating the safety of these geothermal networks, just providing that framework. So this guidelines was not a formal rulemaking, but the basically is to kind of repeat what we're doing for geothermal that we're doing currently for gas pipelines and for steam pipelines. And it's only for the ones that are in the public right of way. Doesn't apply exclusively to private property. But basically it's replicating, as I said, the same sort of practices in terms of testing, technical standards, inspectors being qualified, all those sorts of things for the geothermal operators, and then minimum requirements for workers, record-keeping requirements, annual report to the division. So those were out. It got some attention because I think we were the first state to do it, but I think we have a really good pipeline safety division that wanted to get out in front of this. And one of the things that we're doing in this GSEP process is getting the pipeline safety folks involved, because I think what we saw in the past was it's largely the rate division that would look at these filings, but they don't have the capability to figure out, gee, could this have been addressed through relining or repair versus replacement? Was this an opportunity for a non-gas pipeline alternative? The economists and the accountants aren't really great at evaluating those sort of things. We need engineers, right? We need folks from the pipeline safety division, so they're now going to be involved in that going forward to make a more rigorous, comprehensive process. Geothermal projects in Massachusetts, so Eversource Framingham was the one that went into service last June. I'm sure you're going to hear about it if you haven't already aware of it. It's pretty much 34 buildings, about 140 customers, cost about $17 million. I think Eversource did a really good job of customer engagement, basically, to get the buy-in. In that neighborhood. I think it's seen as a pretty good success story, and they're going to be looking at additional money from DOE. I think they're actually getting it to expand at another phase. But it's what you can see now if you tour it. As I mentioned before, you can see the pipes down the middle of the street, laterals out to houses, but then they drilled a couple sets of boreholes, and there's a pump house. But pretty straightforward. But it's like I say, it's the nation's first utility scale network geothermal project. I think it's pretty successful. So we'll be looking at the cost. They'll need to make a filing with us. Again, from the regulator's perspective, do these costs make sense in terms of being imposed on other customers? So National Grid had proposed a project in Lowell that has now been canceled. The numbers just didn't make sense. I don't think they have the same level of participation. The thermal loop, when you look at how many customers within that loop are going to be signing up, the numbers just didn't make sense. They're also looking at there's a project currently underway at National Grid at the Franklin Field Apartments in downtown Boston with the Boston Housing Authority. So that one project is still underway. National Grid was authorized to pursue 4 demonstration projects. These are the first 2. The other thing that's pretty exciting is we haven't seen the filing yet, but Eversource included in its climate compliance plan is network geothermal for new construction. I think we're going to be seeing that in the next couple of weeks, but they're seeing that as, when I have these informal conversations with some of the LDC management, I said, can you please stop adding new natural gas customers? How do we get to net zero by 2050 if you're going to keep adding new natural gas customers? But there's a profit incentive, right? They put that pipe in the ground and they earn a return on it. It's going to be in place for 50 or 60 years. But Eversource says, well, let's look at network geothermal as an alternative to expanded natural gas, just continue to add new natural gas customers. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I expect we'll see it in the next couple of weeks, but to see how those numbers look when you basically do network geothermal for new construction as opposed to the retrofit, which is going on in Framingham and in Lowell. Current challenges, as I mentioned before, and Christine Hoffer's slide mentioned it, but that's some of the stuff I talked with Roy Christian about when we first started talking about this stuff. It's the obligation to serve. Is when you do these decommissioning projects, and what they said, what the LDCs all said in their NPA analysis in this recent GSEP filing is we have to have 100% participation of the customers in order to decommission the pipe. So if you get a subdivision with maybe 30 customers, it's at the end of a line, it's a logical place to decommission part of the line because of leak-prone pipe. We're going to spend all this money to address the leak-prone pipe. Can we do electrification instead? And if 28 of the customers are in, but 2 say no, then you can't do it because we can't go to those customers and say, we're going to substitute electricity for natural gas. They could say, no, we think under the law we're entitled to are continuing to get gas service. And so states have wrestled with it. I think New York's tried to run a bill. We tried to run a bill. California, you might hear about it, passed SB 1221, which allows, if 65% of the customers agree that they want to have air source or electrification, air source or ground source, they can basically overrule the 35% who don't want it. So that's interesting. If there's 65-35, you don't have to have 100% participation because they passed a law, but it's very controversial. So we're still working on it, but that is a big challenge in terms of it's hard to make these demonstration projects work if the utilities say we have to have 100% participation, because if you can't decommission the pipe, the numbers just don't work very well. So that the savings are, that's where the savings is to be able to decommission the pipe and avoid spending all that additional money addressing leak-prone pipe and instead spend the money on electrification with air source or ground source heat pumps. As I mentioned before, monetizing the benefits of geothermal, making sure that the geothermal projects are compensated for the benefits that they provide, both the grid benefits and the avoided T&D investment. But the big challenge is monetizing those upfront costs. The numbers are so compelling long-term for customers. This is the way to go, but how do you address those upfront costs? We're looking at a couple of things in Massachusetts. The governor's going to be running a bill within the next couple of weeks on energy affordability. Whether this makes it into the bill or not, we've been kicking it around the notion of on-bill financing, that the utility could actually finance that for the customer. You would pay those costs back through your bill over time. So if you end up selling the house, the obligation runs with the meter. So because the new owner is going to benefit from the long-term benefits of that installation. So on-bill financing means the utility would still collect the obligation runs with the meter. And then utility ownership of the geothermal resource is another possibility. That raises issues of, are you going to limit that to just the natural gas LDCs, or will other third parties be able to get into the business? And then right now we have exclusive service territories. If somebody wants to come in and provide that service, will the LDC who's serving that area be able to object and say, I'm sorry, I have the exclusive right to serve this area, and I don't want you coming in here selling your thermal energy networks. But these are the kind of challenges that we're having, but addressing those upfront costs is a huge issue. But I think we're very aware of it, because I think geothermal networks are potentially a major contributor in terms of achieving those greenhouse gas reduction targets that we need to achieve in Massachusetts. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So as we go to questions, Eowyn is over here and Chris Winkler is over here, but the chair is up for a bit of a discussion. So I think that's lovely. We have a little bit of time. Stand up, identify yourself.
I'm Jack Deanna. Jamie,
Stand up, please.
I used to be tall. I've been in this 40 years. Jamie, I'll tell you what, that's the best presentation I've seen yet. The last slide is exactly what I'm proposing, utility ownership, on-bill financing. But my question is, can you bring this to NY-GEO? Because the regulators are the ones that impede this, for the most part, for utilities. But I really do think that the only way this is going to get going, and according to the Pathways report from DOE, this is the only way to support a stronger grid. So what you're doing and what Rory's doing should be done all across the country. I come from Pennsylvania, by the way. So.
Yeah. So NY-GEO is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. It's basically all my counterparts from across the country. NY-GEO actually has a task force on this natural gas transition. Rory and I are on there, as is Doug Scott from Illinois. Megan Gilman's a really good commissioner from Colorado who's on this stuff. Radina Volova, who you're going to see later today, is on there. So as I mentioned, the commissioners across the country will get together, we'll talk about these things. We also have committees, and the committees approve resolutions. So what you're talking about is potentially putting that resolution in front of a committee. I think it makes sense. So we'll talk about it among ourselves and figure out. Doug Scott has done some resolutions in the past, and Rory and I have talked about this stuff. But I think on-bill financing, way back when I ran the Pace Energy and Climate Center in White Plains in New York for 3 years, and worked on some of these issues in New York. And there was an on-bill financing demonstration pilot project, we called it, I think. Because there's a lot of advantages when you look at having that obligation run with the meter, because a lot of these investments that folks will make, it's like, well, I might sell my house in 5 years. I don't want to invest in something that's going to be providing these benefits. The only way it pencils out is if I own this place for 10 or 15 years. But with on-bill financing, the obligation runs with the meter. So you move out after 5 years, then the subsequent owner is going to be paying the rest of that balance off, because the subsequent owner is benefiting from the continued benefits produced by that investment. So it's another way of getting at it, and you also get access to the utilities, access to cheaper capital. So you'd have the utility do that and pay it back. I think it makes a lot. I've been a big proponent of on-bill financing for a long time, so I think it helps deal with these upfront costs. So we'll look at it. Great question.
Hi, Ed Hamzandu from Mascan Capital. We are a housing development company based in Massachusetts and working in South Coast. We have currently a couple of projects in Fall River and New Bedford. In Fall River, Massachusetts, we are trying to convert this historic mill to housing units, and I've been working on geothermal options through Mass Save, National Grid, and Liberty for gas for months and months. Unfortunately, despite all the efforts from administration, when it comes to on the ground working day to day, I've been tossed around, and nobody really knows the system. Nobody can help us, and as you know, the upfront costs are massive, and we really need some help. But so far, I haven't figured out who is in charge or who can help us with this project, and I would greatly appreciate if we can direct us to the right organization or people. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you after this. I mean, I think we're working our way through this transition. We have a lot of things going on with the LDCs right now, with this GSEP proceeding that we have going on. They just spent all this time putting together their climate compliance plans and working out their NPA framework. And now we've got this integrated energy planning, because the gas divisions and the electric divisions, even if you're a dual fuel utility, they don't talk to each other much. They're not used to sharing customer information. The electric side can't share the information with the gas side. So there's issues to work through, but I think that's one of the challenges, is getting them to come to the table and say, look, these are statutory targets. This isn't just a guideline. These are not goals or objectives that the next chair might not want to pursue so diligently. These are statutory targets, and sort of getting the utilities on board. And I think with Eversource doing this demonstration project for new construction as an alternative to continuing to expand the natural gas system, I think some utilities are figuring out. And I've said when I did a presentation after we issued this Future of Gas order in December, in terms of we need the LDCs at the table. This is really complicated stuff in terms of the transition for an LDC, the transition for the employees who work for the LDCs. It's complicated. And I cite the example of Jim Rogers, who used to be the late Jim Rogers, used to be the CEO of Duke Energy. So back in 2008 and 2009, when the country was debating about whether we're going to have cap and trade for greenhouse gas emissions in the climate bill that got passed by the House in 2009, Jim Rogers famously said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So he made sure that Duke Energy was involved in those conversations rather than having things imposed upon them. You need to have the companies in there to help provide the solutions. I think it's the same thing here, but there's the profit motive to continue to invest in gas, to continue to put additional pipe in the ground. It's hard to overcome that, but that's my job as a regulator. I'm not working on the natural gas transition or the clean energy build on the electric side, and it's affordability and making sure that we get the gas companies on the path that's going to produce the lowest cost for customers over time.
So a couple more questions, and be succinct in your question and get it to the chair.
I'll try to be succinct in my answer.
Good morning, Hendrik Scarroll with Willdan Energy Solutions. Sir, you may have covered this. So the gas utility has cash flow statement, bonds, et cetera, and the electric utility the same. But clearly the gas utility can look at net 50 as I'm getting out of the business, as opposed to the electric utility that's gaining business. How do you consider that in your planning process?
That's one of the challenges, particularly for gas-only utilities, is figuring out what does that transition look like. I mean, one thing I would say, emphasize is, we're talking 2050. It's still 25 years out, but that is part of the challenge, which is why I think I still strongly urge the gas companies to be at the table, and I think we're starting to see that in Massachusetts. But those are challenges. How do you attract and retain a good management team, a good workforce, if so the future is, well, net zero by 2050 means my company ceases to exist? Well, do you have opportunities to transform into a thermal network company? Do you have opportunities to get into other similar lines of business? But I think, and then for the electric side, it's different. And if you're a dual fuel utility, you're just going to sell more electricity and less gas. You make less money by not selling gas and selling more electricity. But as regulators, we can try to figure out how to address that difference. But that's a big challenge. But I think that's why I'm glad the Massachusetts legislature authorized the LDCs to get into business. I'm excited to see what Eversource's demonstration project looks like. If they're going to provide, they're going to encourage a builder to put in network geothermal in a new development instead of a gas distribution system. So I think we'll see what those numbers look like. But I think that's part of the challenge, is to be able to tell that picture to the LDCs and to the workers who are employed by the LDCs. This is the transition that we're working on.
Good morning, James. I'm Tony Gelber from Pratt Institute, Brooklyn. You're a regulator, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to want to do a geothermal project, but when we look at our costs, we got capital costs. Yes, we might be able to do some financing. We'll have somebody do the project for us. But when we look at energy costs for heating a building with geothermal versus gas, it's about 2.5 times more expensive, even with the water source geothermal. So we're going to do this because you talked about the cost of carbon. Our cost of carbon is $268 per metric ton. That's by New York City Local Law 97. That's probably one of the highest that anybody in this room is experiencing. Even with that, though, we'd be better off just paying the fine, right? Because when you look at the cost to reduce the carbon, it doesn't pay. There's no payback on our geothermal projects. So as a regulator, what I want you to do for us, I want you to get us electric geothermal rate that makes it competitive. It would make a big win for everybody in this room, right? We're moving toward electricity. We need a lower rate for geothermal. Can you do that?
So you're talking about the electricity that's used by the geothermal installation?
Yes, I'm saying, we'll be honest and tell you we use 10,000 or 10 million kilowatt hours for geothermal this year. We want to pay 4 cents a kilowatt, not 24 cents a kilowatt hour. And I think that would help everybody in this room. It would help us to meet these carbon goals. But without that, there's no payback. I mean, my colleagues in the field of universities, we just laugh and our thing is just tell your boss there's no payback.
Okay.
That's it. Case over.
We're at
Well,
time. But
first thing I'll say,
we'll let the chair give a shot at that.
Radina's going to be here. She's actually a New York regulator. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think it goes back to my point of making sure that we're monetizing the benefits that geothermal provides. So you may be able to make a case that says, here's why we deserve a lower electricity rate, because if you do geothermal, the peak is going to be lower. So the market clearing price of the New York ISO is going to be lower. Everybody benefits. Everybody should share in that. And the greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the avoided T&D infrastructure costs, because the peaks are lower. You could say, can you make a case for cost-based rates that said you deserve lower electricity prices because we're going to monetize the benefits that geothermal provides? I mean, that's what regulators do. I mean, that's it. You want to design rates that capture those benefits to make sure that, and the price of carbon is going to be in there as well. So, but the numbers have to work. But at some point, the regulators can also say, well, it's kind of expensive now, but we can see a pathway. This is going to be lower over time. So we're going to dive into this, and as we scale up, those numbers should come down. Regulators can decide to socialize some of those costs too, if it makes sense long-term for customers.
Very good. Let's give a big hand for our